All right. Okay, ready? Countdown, 3, 2, 1, 7. Okay, well, we're here kind of like a unique, this is a first for me where we've had multiple people on, but we're talking about leadership quotes. So I got a few of my friends and peers. So we got Mike Kinney with Coppertop Construction there in Eugene, Oregon. Say hi to everyone, Mike. And then David Smith, you're also in Eugene, Oregon, so this is a real diverse panel. But you work for a software company that provides services, bidding software for people in the trades as well. And Mike used to work at Les Schwab. That's where I think I first met you. And then David and I used to work together for a property restoration company, a well-known property restoration company. And so we'll get into the meat of it. Who wants to go first with your quote?
There you go.
Okay. What do you got, Mike? I'm trying to look.
So discipline equals freedom. Jocko Willink.
Be tougher. What up? That's all you got to do. Quit being a baby. Develop. Just be tougher. Next.
I've read all his books, and for me, it just means, any kind of goals you have, whether it's work goals, financial goals, life goals, it takes discipline to reach those goals. And so if you don't have structured systems in place and programs that you can follow, the odds of reaching those goals are very slim, so that discipline equals freedom it's the hardest thing is to be disciplined to get there. But if you can, that is where the freedom comes from. So for me, it's just, I think about that all the time whenever I'm trying to accomplish something. It's the details, it's the little things each step of the way that will actually get you to that end goal. And if you can focus on those, you can get there. Where if you're thinking big picture and you want to go from point A to point Z, instantly, the odds aren't in your favor. So for me, it's just it's been a good reminder. I always think of that in the hard times, doing the things that you don't really necessarily want to do, but they're going to inch you closer to your goals. That's part of it for me. It's just like that discipline of sticking to it will get me there.
So did you read that when you were still managing a team there at Les Schwab then?
Yeah, that's where I first read it.
Do you remember how you became aware of it? Was it like part of a subscription service or someone?
A buddy of mine, a guy I promoted in management, he told me about the book that he's down in California. He was reading it. And so I got it and started reading it. And so there's the initial book that he has. And then the next one was The Dichotomy of Leadership. So that's kind of he has all these different procedures and they tie it into the military. He was a Navy SEAL. And so it kind of explains that whenever there's, a system or something, there's a dichotomy. There's always, like, if you want to be, you have to be, you have to be direct and firm, but yet you can't go overboard with it. There's always the level of balance that you have to try to find when it comes to leadership. You have kind of the guiding principles, but you can't go overboard with it one way, and you can't go underboard either. You got to actually find that balance, and that's different in every scenario. So
have you read that, or have you heard of Jocko Willink, David?
I have not.
He's got a podcast.
Good.
Too. I think that's how I first became aware of him. But no, we have a mutual friend, Derek. I think he recommended it. But so the discipline equals freedom. Would you agree with that, David? Then do you think that that applies to your experience in leadership as well?
Yeah, no, that definitely does. It kind of even ties in with the same quote that I had. Definitely discipline, does equal, freedom.
Yeah. Well, for you, Mike, is that how did that apply when you were managing others, and then even maybe more so now that you're managing yourself, right? You went from working for a big company, basically all of us went from working for a big company, a known entity. And so how did I guess I'd like to ask you both. How does discipline equals freedom? How did that apply when you were managing a team for somebody else's large company? And then how has that transitioned to now you, Mike, as an entrepreneur running your own company, and then you, David, working for a smaller company and quite a different system. So we'll start with you, Mike.
I think for me, the years I spent working with teams and leading teams of people, I always found that when there's less structure, less guidelines, things just seem to unravel quicker, and people weren't necessarily able to respond as fast in a situation where you needed them to.
Yeah.
Where if you have a structured system and everybody understands each step of it and everyone's on the same page, then when things happen, like in that business, it was, we called it snow rush or spring rush, where you have this mass influx of customers and you have a certain amount of time you got to run all these cars through. Everybody kind of just knew the systems, and so everything went a lot smoother during those times, opposed to, if you didn't have any kind of systems in place, then, let's say the lead gets taken out for some reason. They go to lunch, they get hurt, they leave, whatever, they're sick. Then you have a whole group of people that don't understand their roles, where if everybody understands each person's role in the systems and it's practiced on a daily basis, then,
Cross-trained.
yeah, exactly. You've got, anybody can plug and play. You can kind of shift and move as you need to kind of get to your end game. So, for me, I always felt like, there's people that don't like to follow rules, or they shy away from rules, or they just want to buck the system just because they don't like structure and keeping everything in a box. But what I always tried to do is teach people the why. Why do we do it, instead of just saying, well, this is the rule, we need to do it. It was, no, because if this, and this happens, this is why we have that in place. And when you can explain the why, they can tend to, they can believe in it more. And so they're more apt to do it just because they understand it more. So the structure and the discipline part of that, it is more comforting for most people to be working in an environment like that. And it can't be so rigid that you lose sight of the actual human aspect of it, the people and the relationship part of it. And there's got to still be that, but there has to be the discipline part of it. There has to be, or else, things don't move forward, or when things get kind of chaotic, it just falls apart and people don't know how to react.
Well, it's funny you mentioned seasonal, because so you're obviously at Les Schwab. Seasonal is the snow tire season is the craziest, right?
Yeah.
And then so David and I worked at Belfort, and it's seasonal too. You have your peaks, kind of the reverse of traditional construction. In the winter, you have your fires, and then periodically you have your, at least in Eugene, you have your floods, or not floods, but your freezes. I remember that was probably one of the most chaotic times for us. But do you have any thoughts on that, David, how discipline equals freedom when you're working and managing other people?
Yeah, definitely with structure. Mike hit it right on the head. Structure is vital towards a team's discipline and your own discipline. We had the same kind of similar experience where we had a structure where we had the right amount of management in place and the right amount of field workers in place that, could actually work together and handle the load. And then once people started leaving, and, your structure kind of, once you don't have those people in place that know what to do, you can't just, somebody that is well versed in multiple trades, you can't have them fill in, and it just throws a wrench into your production, and it just causes, kind of a chaos atmosphere to it. And that really starts messing with everything. Your structure really does lead to discipline. It, it allows you to, free yourself up and your team up, to focus on, the steps that got you to where you were, to be successful. And then once it's just kind of a trickle effect. Once that happens, it just goes downhill from there. Once you start losing that structure, you start losing your discipline as well.
Yeah. Well, I know too, when it's busy, it makes you think about like, oh, we should have a structure. We should tweak this, it exposes kind of the holes. But the hardest part is then when you're not as busy, or if you get in a slow season, you're not typically as motivated to make those changes. So I think that's where, in my mind, that's where the discipline really comes in, because you have to prepare yourself in those slower times when, and if you think you're going to do training when you have time, you'll never have time. You have to make time for training and setting the systems in. And you have to be almost more disciplined when you're slower, or else you'll lose that opportunity to prepare your team. You know, and that's what, like David was talking about, and I'm sure you had that too, Mike, when you have, you know, when you're slammed, that your lowest trained people just have to do the basics, right? Keep the bays clean, you know, make sure the techs have what they need to do what they need to do. And the same applied in property restoration. It's like, you know, your job is to listen and do whatever the heck we're telling you to do, because we got to get this stuff done. And then in the slower times, you know, when it's not crazy season, that's when you really have to double down on training. And that's hard. I know that was hard for us in a bigger system. You know, not everybody sees the value of training, but it comes to fruition when you're in those crazy times. So going to now being self-employed for you, Mike, how has that played out in being an entrepreneur?
Well, I think it's similar. You know, I found the first probably month after I went out on my own, you know, for years I've gotten up at 4 a.m. and part of it was just to get a little bit of me time before I went to work at 6 as a Schwab, right? And so after I left, I'm like, oh, I don't need to get up at 4 a.m. anymore. So I started sleeping until 6:30-ish.
Oh, wow.
Around there, right?
Wow.
And
lazy.
But I quickly went back to getting up at the early time, because I found that system allowed me time to just be on a routine. And so being by myself, it's super easy it would be real easy to just not do anything one day if I didn't want to. It's like, you don't have anything pressing or anything scheduled. It's like you can literally do nothing if you want to. But I find that keeping a disciplined schedule of blocks of time where I do certain things during the day has helped me keep progressing forward with the business and gaining more clients and staying on task on projects. Because that's the one thing that really bothers me about industry, is that it seems that customers that are paying tend to get jerked around on their schedule because people bouncing jobs back and forth. So I kind of committed to only having 3 projects going at a time so that I can manage that, so they wouldn't have to be bumped because a more important job popped up, or, you know, something else, or something, you know, a big disaster at another job, and all of a sudden I got to put this one on hold. So I quickly saw that could be the case with this. So I wanted to get on a disciplined schedule for myself to where I could maintain the quality of the work I was producing. So it's definitely tied into it. And as I grow with employees, you know, those systems will naturally come into play for training them and giving that same quality. So.
Yeah, I think I recently saw a quote talking about set every business up as for scale, you know, I think you got the right mindset, you know, trying to be more of the GC as opposed to doing everything hands-on. How about you, David? I know we've talked about offline. Now that you're not in property restoration, it's hard to adjust your mentality to a normal workload. How's it different at your new place of employment?
Yeah, right off the bat, you know, meeting with my new managers and just kind of talking to them about it. And what hit me right off the bat was, you know, their philosophy was, if it's hard, we're doing something wrong.
Handsome! Let's not lose our cool. Then we're no better than the machine.
And they started the company, and they've been bought out by a large corporation, and they just keep getting bigger and bigger. And they've actually had their hand in every step of the way. So they know what it takes and what everybody goes through. And so they've actually, you know, going back to, we were talking about our structure, you know, knowing what it takes to be successful, you know, they have this philosophy of have the right people in place. And if we have, you know, everybody gets kind of during the busy season, right? They get freak out. hire more people. Then what do you do when you start to slow down? And so they tried to find this sweet spot of having the right amount of people, throughout the whole year. There's no laying anybody off, hiring extra people when you get busy. They have this philosophy of just having the right amount of people, and they could focus on, the structure and knowing multiple, parts of the organization so we could fill in when needed. And so not everybody's overwhelmed. So that's been a huge adjustment for me. And, it's allowed me to be successful where I'm at, being able to focus on my role, and I could help out in other departments, when need be. But, it's not overwhelming in the sense of, normally in restoration, you're just like, I don't have any time left in the day, and then you're putting in extra hours and it still wasn't even enough, to get you through. So, it's amazing, seeing somebody, stick to a structure and making sure that they have the right amount of employees and, the right philosophy, to put people in the right spots.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm wearing my Sounders jersey, but the pro teams, they invest so much in their employees that they wear those monitors, they're tracking them when they're practicing throughout the week, the stress loads and those kinds of things. You mentioned not being overwhelmed, and I mean, that's a tricky one, especially when you're managing other people, like monitoring, like workloads and those kinds of things. And I know we tried to do that, and that was easier said than done, especially when you're not, even if you're at the top, you're still middle of something, so having complete control is not there. Whereas Mike, you now have complete control, right? But even then you're working for somebody, so you have to set
because it's just like, it's, you just own a job basically. I still have, clients and, that dictate what I do and how I do the business. So I still cater to that. I still, if I don't work, I don't get paid, so I mean, there's still controls, and there's still a boss. It's just, I'm in a little bit more control of my schedule and time and everything. So.
Well, I like what you said, trying to structure your system to take care of the clients as needed, as opposed to, when you're working for somebody else, a lot of times it's, put out the fires or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
Well, let's get into your quote, David. You had, well, I don't want to steal it from you. What was your quote?
It was either you either you run the day or the day runs you. It was by Jim Rohn. I actually ran into him, listened to, he's I think he was popular like around 70s. But he was Tony Robbins' mentor. But I actually ran into some of his material on EntreLeadership.
And good. Like you buy a car you can't afford and everybody thinks you're making it. Look at George. George is doing good. Did you see that car he bought? That job must be kicking it. All George got was a payment coming out of his freaking ear holes.
Okay.
And so then I was able to kind of pull up his own videos, and, he does have some kind of, kind of the off the wall quotes and philosophies, but, they're still true today. So
yeah,
it kind of ties into the philosophy we're talking about, the discipline, not letting the day get out of control, and reminding yourself that, you are the one that controls how your day goes, and, your setup, like Mike was saying, your routines, you're in control of that. If you have, those people that get up, work out, or have breakfast, or whatever the routine is, it just allows them to create this fresh mindset. What am I going to accomplish today? As opposed to those people that, get up last second, rush in, get in the shower, rush to work. They're just rushing and not actually sitting down and taking the time to gather themselves, take care of themselves, and put a plan together to how they're going to accomplish the day, and what their main focus is going to be.
Well, you touched on that, and I know, Mike, you felt that too. Where you were at, where in the place that we were at, you don't control the workload, right? I mean, we worked for companies that made agreements to, I know at Schwab's, like the customer comes in, they have certain policies that you do it. And then we worked, we were a smaller market for Belfour, so we did a lot of program work. So if the work came in, it didn't matter when it came in, we were expected to do it. And so like you said, David, I think kind of touching on control what you can control, you mentioned previously not being overwhelmed. And then, so is that for you? How did you, in a system where it's just continually a tidal wave of work, how did you handle, trying to, run your day? What were some of the disciplines that helped you?
Yeah, I think, most of the time it's, and you are right, it's just, you can't control the workload that's coming at you, like when you have a freeze or some sort of, cat event that comes at you, you can't control that. But you can, control of, trying to have the same structure throughout the day. Obviously there is going to be a wrench thrown up, but like, if you look at emails first thing in the morning, or meet with your crews, or, you spend a couple hours late morning, dealing with your customers, trying to keep to your same routines and your schedule. That is key. Yes, you're not going to be able to keep up with the workload, but if you try to keep the same structure and mentality, you can come close to, producing the same results, that you have, when you actually have this, the manpower and the workloads manageable.
Yeah. Well, it ties into even that concept you mentioned, Mike, the extreme ownership. Like, you've got to own your part of it, right? So if you say, well, this company doesn't care or whatever, and all three of us were in service-based and still are in service-based industries. That's part of what attracts you to it, right? Being able to, when a customer calls and you can create the solution and your team is the best, that's exhilarating, but you've got to control your part of it, right? And not, and if you can't handle it or you feel like it's untenable anymore, then you have to explore your other opportunities. Mm-hmm. Sometimes easier said than done. So how about you, Mike, as far as like running the day? You talked about you like to wake up early, and then you had a lazy spell where you're getting up at 6:30.
It's ridiculous. I know.
Yeah, geez. Do you have any thoughts on that, run the day or the day runs you?
Yeah, I think that ties right into why I do that. What I found was, especially being by myself for most of all of last year, really, I would be on jobs and I couldn't tend to some of the business stuff like I wanted to during the day, because I was constantly in this mode of choosing, okay, if I break away from this job to go do a bid or to go meet with another client or to handle back office business stuff, that I was taking away from that client's experience and their project. Yeah. So there was this constant, this kind of tug of, I don't feel comfortable with this. And so I chose to get up back at my normal time early to where I could still have some time for, growth and learning, reading in the mornings, just mentally relaxing. And then I can jump right into getting some of the back office business stuff done before my family's up, before any of that hits, before anybody else is out doing work. I've got all that stuff done, whether it's bidding jobs, running invoices, making sure my books are in line. I could do all that in the morning while I'm sipping on coffee and get that out of the way before the day ever begun. And so then I didn't have to worry about it during the day. So there was no more of that tug and pull getting behind because I was, on other jobs or running to get materials or this or that. So it just made it a lot easier for me to structure my day without having to worry about something not getting done that really needed to get done. Because that happens to a lot of people. They don't pay attention to the business side of things, and they're great at their craft and they have a passion for what they do and they're really great at what they do, but they let the back office business stuff kind of get all scrambled, and that ends up in their bottom line, which ultimately is what keeps you in business. So I didn't want to go down that road.
Well, I know we talked about that, like, when I had my own business, it's exactly like you said. If you're not out marketing, you're not getting future work. And if you're not invoicing, you're not getting your cash flow. But at the same time, you're out there on the job to get it done so you could bill it, and you have to decide. So, I guess that's probably maybe another great discussion is, knowing when to add pieces. And I think that was something, I think that ties into kind of where I was going with the quote that I picked. But, you may not be in control of everything, especially if you're working for another company, but you can control what happens within your team. And I think that's something David and I tried to do, where we didn't always have input on whether we could add a team member, especially for some of those administrative roles. So we kind of use that, in creative ways to try to create opportunities. And, and that's actually, how David, we created an opportunity for David to come up, was,
Bo Body. What does the first B stand for?
What are we doing?
We're making acronyms. Okay, what does the first B stand for?
Experiment with some of those opportunities if I was out of the office and those kinds of things. That was way early on. But yeah, I think that goes into control. You can control what you can control. So the quote I picked was, I think it's a quote. It's from Good to Great, where Jim Collins talks about get the right people on the bus and then get them in the right seats on the bus. And I know, I don't think David and I read that together, but we had both read that book and believed in those principles. And the idea being, it is insane how many companies, and we did it too, even in direct hires, you don't hire to the vision of what you're trying to build or the structure that you have in place. And, I think we found more and more over time, and it's just proven true even from my prior mentors, my time, there in Eugene, and then even beyond, is it is more important to get people that are a good fit for your system, than it is to find people that are, quote unquote, uber talented or have a lot of experience, and I personally have always enjoyed getting people that, were honest, hardworking, and willing to learn, and then teach them, the system, as opposed to trying to get the guy that has, years and years of experience with somebody else, but he's coming to your company because he wants $1 more, he or she. But so getting the right people on the bus, I guess maybe let's start with that. What has been your experience with hiring the right kinds of people? I'll start with you, David. What's some of your insights on, like, how did you approach trying to bring the right people in?
Like you said, sometimes, we didn't have, the options of the right timing to pick the people that we needed, and we had to make things work. But I think when we did have the chance to actually interview and bring people in, it was, like you said, you're dealing with, you want to hire the right personalities and mentality, just, and not jumping the gun, and hire somebody right there on the spot, first interview, having, go out, meet them face-to-face, coffee, phone interviews, follow up again face-to-face, actually take the time to get to know somebody before you make the decision. Because you want to make sure that they're going to fit in your team and your philosophy, because you don't know where you're going in the future, and how things are going to change, but at least you get the right people, so really trying to dig your heels in when you're doing your research and finding people, not just pulling the trigger quickly, but actually taking the time and finding the right personalities and mentality to bring on your team.
Well, I know you and I had conversations about that. Like, some people, sometimes we would present somebody and they maybe had more experience than, it was odd. Some people would have, they seem overqualified, but they want the opportunity. And I know we discussed that. It's like, I don't mind if someone's going to be here for 3, 6 months, a year, as long as they're cranking it out and giving 100%, then, I'd rather have somebody that's going to kick butt for 6 months and gracefully move on than, try to keep going with people that don't want to be there. How about you, Mike? What was your experience with kind of bringing the right people into the organization, maybe good and bad?
I think because of my long span with one company, I had over 23 years with Les Schwab, and in early on in my management career, when I was hiring people, we literally had kind of the pick of the litter, right? We had no problem getting employees, and we could pick and choose the right personality, the right character, the right kind of attitude to plug in. And so you could really look for those qualities in an interview. You can work them for a little while and see if that was a good fit. And fast forward, the last, I don't know, 10 years, it changed. And it got to be where you didn't have as much opportunity to hire people because the job market got really, really good for people. So everybody had jobs. And so you were now picking from the workforce that for whatever reason it is, they necessarily weren't working, or they weren't really attracted to come work, 8, 9, 10-hour days, sweating it out.
I can't believe we drove around all day and there's not a single job in this town. There's nothing, nada, zip. Yeah, unless you want to work 40 hours a week.
Getting dirty, So it shifted. So I have a little different perspective on each time. I think where we would try to find those personalities, but we also got really good at, I could tell within a week of working with somebody if it was going to work out long term. And it was very accurate because there were certain things, and every business is different, but there are certain qualities that just flat characteristics that person will see success in your business if they show those qualities. Now, some of that stuff can be taught, but there are certain things that have to be kind of, naturally within them. And so we would hire in mass scales for the busy seasons. So we didn't always have the luxury to just really pick and choose. We had to hire a bunch of people and hope that the majority of them will do well during that influx of business. And then you kind of weed them out through that process to make your team for moving on through the summer months and heading into wintertime. So it was kind of the early months were the vetting process. So you hire a bunch of people and you would kind of pick and choose who has it, who doesn't. When it slowed down a little bit, you would let go the ones that didn't. And then you kind of maintain with the ones that did. But there's different philosophies on that. There were some managers that would lay people off and, kind of string them out and bring them back, and they used that as a tool to weed out kind of the weaker employees. And I've never really, I've done that, but I never really bought into doing that as a standard. I always felt like if you were too heavy on employees or somebody just wasn't cutting it to the grade that you needed them to, you let them go and you find the person that you can hire that will make it, instead of trying to force and mold somebody into a position. You may see success with that every once in a while, but as a whole, as a standard, I never really believed in that. I cut them loose and I would move on and I would try to find somebody else, instead of trying to, well, maybe they'll change or maybe they'll fit into our systems, because the odds are they aren't, And you can be surprised, but the odds aren't in your favor on that.
Yeah, that was, we had some unique things in Eugene. We had some people that wanted part-time work. And so, we had a really good partner at a staffing company that, people wanted some more flexibility in their employment. And so that was an advantage. I know when I got to Seattle, especially as this $15 an hour thing becomes more and more, of a trend. And then, in Seattle, there's a lot more union work, it was extremely hard to recruit people for, when it's like, if you're comparing to $15 an hour at a McDonald's, or a Starbucks versus, what we ask people do in property restoration, it's pretty crazy. So, and even in, when I was in Eugene, we would have conversations because we were starting to bring people in at higher and higher. Thankfully, we were able to get that. But the conversation was our expectations after 90 days, you're going to be, prove that you're ready to rock and roll, that you're growing, or else, we will have to let you go because we're trying to, to bring people in. And in Eugene, it was, I know, Schwab's and at Belfour, those were good jobs. They were better than, some of the average jobs, whereas in Seattle, it wasn't, someone could go be a union carpenter and make, 3 times as much, so that's what you were competing with. So it definitely changed the metrics, and what you were looking for. And it was crazy what people were paying less talented carpenters, so that was, getting the salaries up, for some of our really talented guys that we wanted to keep, that was a challenge here. And, for the company I was working for in Seattle. So I think that's going to be an ongoing, deal. So then what about, the quote goes, get the right people on the bus and then get them in the right seats on the bus. And man, I feel like that's probably even more so, if you're fortunate enough to get people in that are honest and hardworking and willing to learn, or even sometimes, 50 to 80% of those factors, then, organizations and people in a position of leadership saying, hey, you're talented in this area, maybe you have a weakness in this area, structuring your team to where people are flourishing where they're strong, and then complementing their weaknesses. I mean, we all have them. What has been your experience with that, Mike? Like tweaking people to try to make them more effective?
I think as it got to be when our crew sizes shrunk over the years, because we, for whatever reason. Yeah, lean and mean. We always kind of felt like we ran that way, but over 2008 to 2010, that shifted everything, right? And so, what I found was it was always my thought when I was evaluating members of the crew, if there's value somewhere, we keep working with them, and in that setting, we did everything. They would work on the cars, they would answer the phones, they would run and do sales, they would order products. We taught them to do everything. Yeah. But not everybody is good at everything. And so I always balanced out that, okay, well, where are their strengths? And is that a value? And if somebody didn't have any more value in the store, that was the determining factor. Hey, we're done trying. We're going to try and try and try, but if there's no value there, they aren't bringing anything to the table, then we don't need them. And so that for our employees and the coworkers, that was a little bit of a harder concept, because they view things as, what is helping me right now. And so if I'm slugging it out, working on cars, and you've got, Joe over there that, seems to be disappearing all the time, that's all that person sees, that employee sees. It's like, well, he's not out here working the cars with me, so he must be no value. But what I see as an overall is, no, he's at the front counter making sales. He's really good with customers, or he's the guy in the back room making sure that we have all the materials we need to do the job. So if he wasn't doing that, you wouldn't be able to do your job. And so there's value there. And so it was a constant coaching of, when there was a flare up between two employees, it was usually something like that, where they just think that they have no value anymore. So I had to kind of open their eyes a lot more of, hey, there is value here. Just like you work really hard in the bays, and we appreciate that and we need that. This individual, they're the first one to run to the truck slab to work on the dirtiest and most strenuous jobs when nobody else wants to. So you just kind of constantly balance that, but it's also shifting those employees and putting them in the places where they're going to be successful too. Yeah. So, giving them that opportunity to use their strength daily, instead of forcing them to do something that maybe they're not as good on and they're miserable and you're not getting any good productivity out of them. It's a lose-lose, where if you can shift them into a position and, let them flourish in what they are comfortable and good at, then the rest of it you can try to build up underneath them and teach them in the smaller doses, I think. So I think it's extremely important to use them in their strengths, and then try to teach them the rest of the stuff as you go. Yeah.
Well, and I think, I don't want to speak for David, but we have talked about this before. I think that comes from, if you're overseeing people too, understanding your own strengths and weaknesses. Not only that, but like, what do you enjoy doing? So you may be overwhelmed in work, but hey, I enjoy doing these tasks. These ones drain me, and then if you have partners and other people on the team to be able to say, maybe some of those things that drain you are things that other people love doing, you know. And so by having those conversations, it doesn't lessen the workload, but it kind of lessens your strain. You're not straining as much to do stuff that you just hate doing that somebody else would love to have, you know, as part of their core responsibilities. And I think that's where David and I worked really well together. You know, our strengths complemented each other.
I work too hard to deal with this stuff. I work too hard. I am a division manager in charge of 29 people. I drive a Dodge Stratus.
So I'll kick that to you, David. You know, what is some of your insights, you know?
Getting people, in the right seats, you know, comes down to a couple of things where, you know, one, you know, observing in a couple different ways. You actually, as managers, you have to be out there. I think you have to be in the trenches with your team. Yeah. And like Mike was saying, you have to be there watching. You know, you can't take if it's your responsibility to build a team, you have to be out in the trenches watching them. You know, you can't take other people's words. You know, yes, you do need their input. You know, what do team members think of each other? But ultimately, the buck stops with you. And so you have to watch them, you know, so either watch them from a distance, working with them, and then second of all, like you said, John, you know, having that honest conversation with somebody, you know, sitting down with the employee, like, hey, you know, if like Mike, like he's saying, he sees somebody who likes going to the desk and doing sales, you know, sitting down with them, like, hey, do you really enjoy the sales part of it? You know, this is a need that is something that we need, you know, and actually, what is your vision of moving forward? You know, is this something you would like to do? Because you can't just say, oh, well, this person looks like they're doing really good at this position, and that's not what they want. So you have to have that balance of watching, you know, working with them, observing, and then having that conversation with them. You know, what do you enjoy the most, and where do you see yourself, you know, moving forward?
Yeah. How can we help align all of those things together? Yeah, those
part of it too. Yeah, being realistic before, like going back to hiring people. I think you have to be realistic of what you're doing. Yeah. And the pay. Like you were saying, John, there's union carpenters, and you know, you'd always hear, you know, hire managers, you know, GMs, regionals say, hey, go get the top talent. Okay, that costs. Yeah. Are you going to pay someone $35, $40 to be a carpenter? And like, well, no, we could only pay $20, $25. Well, you're not going to get the top talent for that. So you have to be realistic. And with that goes back to, you know, finding, you know, the right personalities, the right mentality. You know, I could teach you. I think most of, you know, in our experiences in the restoration world, that was finding somebody that was just willing. I think some of our best hires, they were just willing. You know, you look at what they were doing. Either, you know, we hired car salesmen, you know, somebody who's making donuts. Actually, two people are making donuts, and they become superstars. Yeah, in their roles. And this is something that didn't happen overnight. Didn't happen in a few weeks. You know, we're talking about years. You know, and you have to be patient. You know, put in the time, and then it will pan out. You know, if you want the right people on your team, you know, you do have to be patient and give them the right resources to be successful.
Yeah. Well, and two, I mean, it's one thing to teach them the skills, and then those people that become kind of your site foreman, and you know, probably I'm sure that was your experience too, Mike. You know, people that are leading teams, that's like a whole nother level of, and especially in our experience when we're hiring younger people, it just takes maturing, right? And then understanding, you know, I've had numerous conversations with people. You're not going to lead the same way I am, but at some point you're going to have to find a way to say, hey, this is what needs to be done. And that doesn't have to be all the time. You know, most of the time, if you're leading and you're doing things, you know, that's, you know, every now and again, there's going to be those conflicts where people butt heads, and you got to figure out how to resolve that. And each person has to do that in their own way. And it's pretty exciting, you know, when that light bulb clicks on and like, oh, this is my style. This is how I approach people, and then seeing people respond to that. And then, you know, conversely, there's some funny stories too. People of just imploding, you know, like they want it and they say they're this or that, and it doesn't quite work out. So Yeah, well, I thank you guys. I mean, we're running up on an hour, so I don't want to steal too much of your time, even though I love talking to both of you. Um, any closing thoughts as it relates to, I think this time in particular, especially for companies, it's, need more leadership, more communication, more collaboration within your teams to come up with solutions. Any closing thoughts?
For me, I just think that all this whole discussion on leadership, there's two things that kind of stand out, and it was already kind of touched on, but ownership.
Yeah.
It starts at the top, right? You have to take honest and genuine ownership when things go wrong, as the leader, because wherever that broken link is, that leads back to you and your efforts and what you've invested in your team. And so it genuinely can be looked at as it starts at the top, and you hear phrases like that, but it really does. And as long as you show that, doesn't mean you can't take action, doesn't mean you can't correct the problem and all that stuff, but you have to genuinely know that, hey, it's my issue. I have to deal with this. I have to take ownership of this. If you can do that, that puts you on a different playing field than your average person who really wants to deflect ownership and maybe blame others, and that will run rampant through your teams. And so attitude is, I think, the basis of it all, even when finding employees. I mean, that right attitude, you can work with a lot of other things, but if you have a bad attitude or the wrong attitude, you're not going to change that in most people. That's something that is harder to move than a skill. So I think everything we're talking about kind of comes back to those two things of having the right attitude and just taking ownership as the leader. If you can do that, then you'll have people that will follow, and then, you can hit your goals.
Yeah, I think today, definitely shows with everything going on in our, in the world with COVID-19, and it's amazing to take a step back and watch how everybody, talks about how do we approach this, and you watch the government, state, local, from the state level to organizations. It's kind of amazing that leadership, where you got people that come out and who are actually stronger now, in this chaos, and they're helping the country, and the rest of the world move forward, because they had a plan, they're calm, and they have the right people in place. Then, you watch the news and it's doomsday, and, it's not going to work, and all these different things. And, I'm grateful to work for an organization that, I thought was crazy, 2 months ago. They put a task force together to approach this. It's like, well, what do you mean? Why would we, have to plan for this? It's not only in China, but they saw what, they asked that question. What if it comes over here? What are we going to do? So they came up with a plan. Here's the different scenarios. Best case, worst case. And once the worst case scenario hit, we're like, okay, everybody's got to work from home. We got to do our part to limit this, this spread. They had everything put in place. Once they pulled the trigger, there's like, all right, you need to grab your equipment, and we have take it home boxes, tech-wise, to get set up, to work from home. It was seamless. And I was able to get it, and everybody else in my office able to get set up that afternoon. So I think it is important, today with all the chaos, it comes down to, having that control and that discipline, all forms of the leadership ladder, just shows very important to keep us afloat. And, I think too, being positive about it, you look at all these, these restaurants, being creative, trying to find a way to stay in business and keep people employed. It's just kind of inspirational, to see how we're going to get through this, and that all starts from the leadership and discipline.
Yeah. Well, I think I'd like to touch on too. I think too often we make leadership this thing, right? And there's people in positions of leadership. It's not separate from the people, right? There's no like this is leadership. It's people and what they do. And so, your quote, discipline equals freedom, and run the day or the day runs you. Those are practical, right? Those are that's whether you're a brand new person on the lowest rung or a mid-level manager or a high-level executive. Those are things that are going to help you, and things that you can control from wherever you are within the organization to try to make something happen. I appreciate you guys, personally and professionally. Just to give people an idea, Mike, you worked at Les Schwab, which is traditionally just, it's dirty, right? Everybody's dirty and it's dirty. And your stores were always like phenomenally clean. I remember when we went to the store on 18th and just dialed in. And to me, that stands out because we always tried to teach our teams, cleanliness is godliness in restoration, and so I remember my manager early on taught me, the last thing you should do is vacuum on your way out. And I don't know how many times, especially customers would just say, thank you. It just shows that you take care, right? And so for me, when I went to your stores and the more I got to know you, I knew that was relevant because it means you're caring about the details, you care about what your people are doing, and you have an idea of like, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to stand out. It's crazy how simple things can make a difference. And then David, when I met David, you were a technician, but you quickly, rose, and you're probably one of the best in property restoration. And I know this is the same, in your service industry, Mike. You have to have a plan for the day, but your plan has to be 100% interruptible because that call comes in, whether it's a high profile client or we get 3 new losses, you have to be able to know where your teams are, shift and adjust. And so, especially as you started taking the reins on those kinds of things, just your ability to, I call you the best puzzle piece, guy in the game. You were always able, it was never like, David was never like, oh my God, what are we going to do? It was like, okay. And you go back to the board and kind of shift things around and, hey, I need you to do this. I need you to do this. And people responded to that. They're like, nobody was like, what are we going to do? Well, there were some people, but not people on our team. Right. And they would just respond to that cool and calm, and say, all right, well, we can do this. And, and we were able to shift pieces and get people taken care of. And, you're calm under pressure. The property restoration is missing out not having you in the game, but I'm sure you're enjoying not being as directly involved. So I thank you guys for sharing your insights and your time, and hopefully this is one of the first of many. So peace.
Yeah, thanks for having us, John. Peace.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I've been encouraged, you and Brandon's, coming to it and just saying, hey, this is cool. What do we do here? What do we do here? It's been exciting to me. So,
well, you've been a huge help to our company too, man. We're excited to kind of see how we both can grow.
Say that again.
John Isaacson has been a crucial role, or played a crucial role in our company, in the growth.
I just wanted to make sure.
He is an Xactimate pro.
Yeah, not a ninja.
No.
Well, cool, man. All right. Well, we'll talk to you again.
Sounds good, buddy.
Maybe it'll be a blooper reel or whatever, but that's the whatever portion.
The official.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Frank could give some input.
Yeah. Let's think about all this.
He's infected.
Yeah.
He's right now.
Patient 0.